So this is going to be, I'm going to have this in one hand and this in the other, so bear with me. You want to bring up the green light on. Bring up the first slide for me. There we go. Yeah. All right. I want to start. I'm really excited about this talk. I'm hoping I get everything in. And, of course, there's a cute baby in the front distracting me, but I'm going to try to buck up and pay attention. But I want to read a quote from Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. All right. Here we go. Human energy presents itself to our view as the term of a vast process in which the whole mass of the universe is involved. In us, the evolution of the world towards the spirit becomes conscious. From that moment, our perfection, our interest, our salvation as elements of creation can only be to press on with this evolution with all our strength. We cannot yet understand exactly where it will lead us, but it would be absurd for us to doubt that it will lead us towards some end of supreme value. From this, there finally emerges in our 20th century human consciousness, for the first time since the awakening of life on earth, the fundamental problem of action, no longer as in the past for our small selves, for our small family, our small country, but for the salvation and the success of the universe. How must we modern men and women organize around us for the best, the maintenance, distribution, and progress of human energy? Okay, that's a lot of stuff. Let me just break it down. It's about human energy, the human journey, us in humanity, that our conscious spiritual evolution is not just for our small selves. It's for all the universe. The paradox is that the small steps we take in our own human journey, like every small step, every time we choose love over fear, for example, that small step has everything to do with the success of the universe. How about that? But today I want to talk about not the small steps. I want to talk about the big picture and why having a grasp of this big picture is really important and can help us in our small steps. Now, one of the things that A Course in Miracles says is that the Holy Spirit will never bring anything into your consciousness that engenders fear. And that is really a lot like spiritual evolution. Like we evolve at the rate we evolve. And whatever is fearful to us, we don't, doesn't really come into our consciousness, or we keep it away. From each consciousness, when I'm going to talk about states of consciousness and the spiral evolutionary model, and I'll take you through with pictures. And the interesting thing that I want you to bear in mind is that from each consciousness, the consciousness that is beyond us looks fearful. If I am in the red consciousness of power and a warrior consciousness, the blue consciousness of order actually looks fearful to me. From the blue consciousness of order, the orange consciousness of enlightenment looks fearful to me. So just remember that as we go on. So let's take a journey through time, and let me talk about integral shapeshifters. We're going to look at the model of states of consciousness through an integral framework, and really what an integral shapeshifter is somebody who is in one state of consciousness and can go up to the next state of consciousness and not engender fear. Someone like, let's say, Dr. Martin Luther King can it's like you have a foot in each level of consciousness, enough so that people will follow you to the next level. I believe that Jesus of Nazareth was like that. I believe that he was an integral shapeshifter. And it's something, by the end of this talk, I hope that everybody here goes, yeah, I'm an integral shapeshifter. Okay? All right. Whoa. All right. We're going to take a little journey through the points of the spiral. Now, around 250,000 years ago, that's when this consciousness started. It's called instinctive self, and they were survival bands, so cave people, right? Now, the interesting thing to me is I showed a picture of cave people painting the cave paintings, some of which we have from 17,000 years old, the Lascaux caves in southwestern France, I think are the oldest ones we have. 17,000 years old. And in the consciousness, the cave people consciousness, there was somebody who had a little bit more than survival, right? Who painted some art on the wall. And that person was a shapeshifter, going from one consciousness to the next. Now, the gifts of instinctive self, which, by the way, all of us carry all of these things in us. There are gifts and there are, things that might hold us back. But the gifts, survival, intuitively sensing trouble, those are things that are gifts that we don't want to leave behind. Something you might want to leave behind. Something you might want to leave behind in a survival is only survival. Survival being all of it. Do what you must to stay alive. No language. You want to leave that behind. The next part of the spiral, the magical self. I have a picture of, now this is a photograph, so it's obviously not from 50,000 years ago, but it is from the Tlingit tribe, Pacific Coast Indians, and it's a picture of a potlatch, which is probably like a potluck, and it's something that we still include in our lives today. So tribal order started about 50,000 years ago. Consciousness shifted from bands of people just surviving. And the magical self is what we call this consciousness. The gifts are awe and wonder, ritual, fun, play. Things that we want to include and appreciate. Maybe a downside would be magical thinking. Not being able to have critical thinking. Feeling at the effect of powers that you are insignificant about. That might be one of those things. But we want to include it as our lift. This is my favorite picture. Wow, it's avoiding me. The power self. The power self. 10,000 years ago. You see, that's Xena, the warrior princess, who's one of my mentors. This was the feudal and exploitive empire around 10,000 years ago. We call it the red consciousness, the power consciousness. And there's a lot of gifts from this consciousness. I just keep wanting to look at Xena, but I'm going to go next. The gifts. Individualism and passion, creativity, courage, boundaries and risks. These are all great things. And let me tell you that in this time and this consciousness, during this time, this consciousness, that's when there were plenty of shapeshifters influencing who were above this consciousness. A lot of these people started writing down the Hebrew Bible. That's when the Buddha was within this time period and in this consciousness, right around before things started to shift. So it all the time, most of the people might have been into power, glory, self-expression. A lot of the way I like to talk about this is might over right. So the strongest person in this culture takes everything. And sometimes that still happens, and it's clearly happening in part of the earth. This consciousness is still happening in part of the earth. It's very clear to us that there are parts of the world where this is the main consciousness, and the strongest person takes over what's happening. So that's why we want to understand the consciousness. And that's why we want to appreciate the gifts and know that it's all going to work out okay. And we were once there. Okay? We were once there. The next one is the blue consciousness, the rules, monarchies, nation states, authoritarian religions. That started about 5,000 years ago. Now, that's a picture of a painting of the Temple of Solomon, as somebody envisioned it. That's about when religions became important and order became important and rules and roles became important. And you can see how this would feel like a lot of safety compared to might versus right. You can see how that's actually a step in evolution. Like you can see how if you're sitting with a bunch of people who are bigger than you and pounding on you, and then somebody comes along and imposes some order and some roles, you're going to feel a lot better. You can see why, yes, this is a good thing. This is evolution. The gifts. Deferring gratification, impulse control, rules and roles. I would say that comes with some safety too. If you follow the rules, you'll be okay. Now, some people, I know that sometimes I still feel like that. You know, there's a part of me that's a blue consciousness, like, God, can we just follow the rules? Could I just have a set of rules that makes everything okay? And if everybody would just follow the rules, then we could all go along together and there would be no problem. So you can understand that feeling. You can understand that part of us. So there's the gifts of that. This is just tricky. It's a tricky thing. The rational self. This happened about 300 years ago. Democracy, science, capitalism, and of course, there were plenty of integral shapeshifters before 300 years ago. Obviously, democracy came way before, the idea of democracy came way before 300 years. But this is when it took hold in the world. Certainly that's when it took hold in our country and the Western countries, and the idea of the rational self. The gifts, individual rights, and democracy, modern medicine, industrialization, critical thinking, IQ, and early global perspective, that you're not just your own country, that you are in a whole world. There's a whole world. So this consciousness has the first idea of a whole world, not just your own community or your own country. I love this self, the sensitive self. This happened about 150 years ago, the ideas of social democracies, pluralism. And I had to look up pluralism, let me tell you. And pluralism just means that you have the attitude that there can be more than one way, more than one group of people, and it can be okay, more than one system of government, more than one way, and it can all exist together. They can be more in one religion, and that can be okay. That we have the attitude that it doesn't need to be one way or our way. So that's working up on the level of consciousness. Gifts that happen in the green consciousness: empathy, social skills, EQ, emotional quotient, concern for ecosystems, social justice, tolerance, and pluralism. The next one we call the second tier. So all the first things I was talking about, all the evolution up to the green meme of the sensitive self, all of those things are the first tier. And now we go to second tier consciousness. And I want to, get us familiar with the idea of second tier consciousness. It's like we've evolved into a certain part where we're ready to go on to the second tier. The second tier is really important because everything up till then has a yin and a yang, and every consciousness has bring gifts. Theoretically, in this model, the second tier of consciousness, this is when we really start to rock. This is when humanity gets in touch with the Christ self. This is when we really are who we were meant to be. The integral self, that happened about 50 years ago. People started, let's just say it reached a level where groups of people started integrating the integral self. Meshworks, which is just systems that relate together. Flex and flow, interlocking dynamic systems. This all started 50 years ago. One of the main things is a heart-brain connection. The gifts: decrease in fear, flexible perspective taking, increase in cognitive complexity, emotional and spiritual intelligence, EQ, SQ, spiritual quotient, creative solutions that address multiple levels of the spiral, integral self, holistic self. Now, I picked a picture for this of Matthew Fox Cosmic Mass because I thought it was so cool, because I've been to that, and it's a wonderful example of the holistic self. Collective individualism maybe started 30 years ago. Whatever that means, that picture of people together worshiping or expressing or connecting to their God self in a group of other people, that's the vision I have for us. Whether we're in a room rocking out to some great beat and expressing our spirituality, or sitting here and listening to Krista sing, or listening to somebody's inspirational interval, which is coming after the talk today. And whatever it is, it's like that. That's our vision for us. Now, the gifts, experience, intuitive and collective intelligence. Here's the part that's interesting. Return of purple at higher levels through ritual, joy, awe, and profound, stable connections to all that is. Okay. I wanted to give you this, the little run-through of the consciousness. I want everybody to think about the second tier consciousness, and I want to talk about perhaps that President Obama is a integral shapeshifter. I want to give credit to Jeff Salzman, who wrote America Goes Green, Thoughts on a Week of Thunderbolts. He talks about, there's a concept in biology called punctual equilibrium, where species can go along evolving and all of a sudden, bam, changes just happen. And this can happen in culture and consciousness. This happened in our country, is the premise, last week. When Obamacare was validated by the Supreme Court, America moved into the green meme, the sensitive self. remember, the overarching point of this talk is to take the bigger perspective. So I want to say, how can we take a bigger perspective on something that we may feel strongly about? The point is, it's not good or bad, this thing that happened. Obamacare validated by the Supreme Court. You may have strong feelings on either side of that. As of Thursday, it is now embedded in American culture that a proper role of government is to ensure basic health care for its citizens. The tension between the left and the right is itself evolutionarily appropriate. Do you hear that? I mean, I'm one of the people that does not enjoy the polarities. I feel like, well, why are we so polarized? Surely we have to get together. Well, what if we take the long perspective that it is actually part of our evolution and it's okay? And the people who think exactly opposite of me, that's okay. They have a point. You know, we're on this end, somebody might be on that end. We all need to be here. And it's okay that's how evolution happens. We don't usually all agree by consensus and walk slowly down the path and it all happens, you know. And I find this refreshing. It's just part of our evolution. That's a good thing. And it would be really important for all of us to take this bigger view. So how about this? The tension between the left and right is itself, I'm going to say it again, evolutionarily appropriate. We don't want the American healthcare system to be smothered by government or to lose its edge in technology and innovation. But listen to this. As our circle of moral consideration ratchets up into the green altitude, that's the green meme, it becomes apparent that a reasonable baseline of health care ought to be extended to all Americans, no matter how sick they are, how terrible their habits, or their station in life. That's part of our evolution too, that everybody deserves some health care. Also, an ongoing project of human evolution from the tribal stage through the postmodern stage, which is where we're at, postmodern, is to provide an ever more safe and reliable world for ever greater numbers of people. Paradoxically, evolution produces an increase in human liberty at the same time. So while evolution gives us the idea that we want to care for everybody, it also brings up more individualism and more freedom. We can see from the second landmark ruling of the Supreme Court, gay marriage legal in all 50 states. One of the features of this level of consciousness is the arising of pluralism. I talked about pluralism, that there can be more than one belief and more than one system existing in the same group of people, and it can be okay and we can get along together. We begin to see the deep humanity of all people, regardless of tribe, race, or background, and eventually sexual and gender orientation as well. When this shift is adequately made, it becomes morally untenable to deny rights to anyone based on these characteristics. This is what President Obama said. And perhaps he does have an idea of what punctuated equilibrium is. Progress on this journey often comes in small increments, sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back, propelled by the persistent effort of dedicated citizens. And then sometimes there are days like this when that slow, steady effort is rewarded with justice that arrives like a thunderbolt. Now, we in this room, it takes some second-tier consciousness to want to come into a room of unity because of our beliefs and what we say. It really does. If you've come into this room and you've lasted through more than one talk, you are in the second tier. You are into integral wholeness. You are already at that point where you might be going up and down. You know, I can still bop way down into red, and I can certainly bop way down into blue, wanting some comforting rules. But we who are in the second tier, we are into our integral and our holistic self. let us be aware and embrace our shape-shifting by acceptance and love toward everybody, whatever polarity they are expressing. And remember that from the level behind, we might look fearful. So it is our job not to engender fear and to push ahead and say, we are right and mighty and this is the way to go. Because, for example, from the consciousness of red, blue looks scary. From the consciousness of blue, from the consciousness of green, yellow looks scary. The green consciousness, which is that everybody matters and that we all want to go together. Sometimes the integration of self-responsibility looks a little scary. So remember that we, all of us, want to be integral shapeshifters, and the spiritual practice is acceptance and taking the big view. You may not want to take a biggest view as 250,000 years of evolution. It might be too much. It's certainly too much all in one time for my brain. But you might want to take the view of what I said, where it might just be evolutionarily appropriate that there is polarity in the country. Like, we do want all people to be well and taken care of, and we have different ideas of how it's going to be. Or we have different ideas of how it's going to be in our church, or our community, or our office, whatever it is. So, this is a lot of facts, and I'm going to give a quiz on Wednesday. Let's take an offering for unity. Take your tithe and your love offering. Let's say our affirmation: divine love as me blesses and multiplies